Longitude. The true story of a lone genius who solved the greatest scientific problem of his time, by Dava Sobel. Introduction. Picture this. It's a foggy night, October 22, 1707. The sea is a churning, gray mess. An English fleet, victorious after battle, is heading home. The admiral, a man named Sir Cloudesley Shovel, has been dogged by this dirty weather for 12 long days. He's sailing blind, and he's nervous. The coast of England is near, a maze of treacherous rocks, and in this fog, it's a death trap. He calls his navigators together. Where are we? They huddle, they consult their charts, they do their best calculations, and they come to a consensus. They believe they are safely to the west of a small island off the coast of France. They are safe. But there's one sailor on board who disagrees. He's not an officer, just an ordinary seaman who has been keeping his own secret records, his own reckonings. By his calculations, the fleet is in mortal danger. He knows that questioning the navigators is a crime in the Royal Navy, a mutinous act. But the danger feels so enormous, so immediate, that he risks his life to warn the admiral. And Admiral Shovel has the man hanged on the spot. Hours later, the admiral's flagship, the Association, smashes into the rocks of the Scilly Isles, just off the tip of England. It sinks in minutes, taking every single soul on board with it. Before the other ships can even react, 2 more are ripped apart by the rocks and swallowed by the sea. In a single night, 4 warships are lost. Nearly 2,000 men drown. The admiral himself is washed ashore, only to be murdered by a local woman for the emerald ring on his finger. What was the fatal mistake? It wasn't a faulty compass. It wasn't bad seamanship. It was a single, devastating piece of ignorance. They knew their latitude, how far north or south they were. That was the easy part. But they had no idea, not with any real accuracy, of their longitude, their east-west position. For centuries, this was the single greatest scientific problem of the age. It was a ghost that haunted every captain, a puzzle that stumped the greatest minds on the planet, Isaac Newton, Galileo, Edmund Halley. The inability to find longitude at sea had cost more lives than any war, caused more economic devastation than any plague. The nation that could solve this problem would rule the seas, and in doing so, rule the world. Today, we're going to dive into Dava Sobel's masterful book, Longitude. This isn't just a story about maps and stars. It's the story of a lone genius, a humble carpenter from the English countryside, who took on the entire scientific establishment of his day. A man who dared to believe that the answer to this epic problem wasn't in the heavens, but in a simple box he could build with his own 2 hands. By the end of our journey today, you will understand how one man's obsession with time changed the course of history. It's a story of perseverance, of incredible ingenuity, and a powerful lesson in how sometimes the most elegant solutions are overlooked in the hunt for complex ones. This is the story of John Harrison, and the invention that conquered the sea. Book summary. To truly understand the world that John Harrison was born into, you have to understand the sea. And the sea, before time could be accurately kept, was a terrifying place. For all the glory of the age of exploration, for all the tales of Columbus, Magellan, and Drake, every single voyage was a gamble. A ship would leave port, and no one, not even the captain, knew for sure where it was. They could find their latitude, their north-south position, with relative ease. The sun's height at noon or the position of the North Star gave them a reliable anchor. A captain could sail the parallel, holding a steady line of latitude across an entire ocean. Christopher Columbus did just that. But longitude, the east-west coordinate, was a complete mystery. The lines of longitude that circle our globes are imaginary, man-made constructs. Latitude is given to us by nature, the equator is a fixed, physical reality determined by the Earth's spin. But the prime meridian, the 0-degree line of longitude, that's just a line we all agree on. In those days, mapmakers drew it through Paris, or Rome, or Jerusalem. It was arbitrary. And this difference is the key to the entire problem. Because longitude isn't just about space. It's about time. Think of it this way. The Earth spins 360 degrees in 24 hours. A little simple math tells you that every hour, the Earth rotates 15 degrees. So, if you know the time right where you are, on your ship in the middle of the ocean, and you also know the time, at that exact same moment, back at your home port, you can figure out your longitude. For every hour of difference between your ship's time and your home port's time, you've traveled 15 degrees of longitude. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? Today, you could do it with 2 cheap wristwatches. But in the 18th century, it was an impossible dream. The clocks of the day were pendulum clocks. Put one on a rolling ship, and it would slow down, speed up, or just stop altogether. Take a clock from cold London to the tropical Caribbean, and the metal parts would expand, the lubricating oil would thicken or thin, and its timekeeping would become a disaster. Changes in barometric pressure, even subtle shifts in gravity from one latitude to another, could throw it off. No clock could survive a voyage and keep accurate time. It simply couldn't be done. So the greatest minds in Europe, the astronomers, looked to the heavens. They saw the sky as a giant, perfect clock, a clockwork universe created by God. The moon, they reasoned, moves across the background of the stars at a steady, predictable pace. If you could just map the sky perfectly, and predict the moon's position against a certain star at a certain time in, say, London, then a sailor anywhere in the world could measure the moon's position from his ship, check his tables, and find the London time. This was the lunar distance method, and it was the pet project of the entire scientific establishment. Kings and governments poured fortunes into it. They founded magnificent observatories in Paris and London for the express purpose of mapping the stars and tracking the moon. Great men like Sir Isaac Newton and Edmund Halley, of comet fame, staked their reputations on it. To them, the solution to this great navigational problem had to be a great astronomical one. It was logical. It was elegant. It was worthy of their intellect. But it was also fantastically difficult. The moon's orbit is maddeningly complex. And trying to measure the angle between the moon and a tiny star, from the deck of a pitching ship in the middle of the night, with the instruments of the day, it was a nightmare. For the average sailor, it was practically impossible. And so, the deaths continued. The shipwrecks piled up. In 1741, a British commodore named George Anson led a fleet around Cape Horn at the tip of South America. After battling a ferocious storm for nearly 2 months, he believed he had finally made it into the Pacific Ocean. He set a course north for a small island, Juan Fernandez, where his men, dying of scurvy, could find fresh water and hope. But a fierce, hidden current had been fighting him the whole time. When the skies finally cleared, he wasn't hundreds of miles into the Pacific. He was still right there, at the treacherous coast of Tierra del Fuego. He had been virtually treading water for weeks. This devastating miscalculation of longitude cost him dearly. By the time his ship, the Centurion, finally limped to the island, more than half of his original 500-man crew were dead. The problem had become a crisis, a matter of national security and economic survival. The British government, in a move of desperation, passed the Longitude Act of 1714. It created a Board of Longitude, a panel of experts, and offered a prize of unbelievable value to anyone who could solve the problem. £20,000 sterling, the equivalent of millions of dollars today, for a practical method of finding longitude at sea. The announcement unleashed a flood of proposals, many of them completely absurd. One idea involved a powder of sympathy, a quack cure that could supposedly heal a wound from a distance. The plan was to send a wounded dog on every ship. Back in London, at noon each day, a person would dip a bandage from the dog's wound into the powder. The dog, yelping in sympathetic pain thousands of miles away, would give the captain a perfect time signal. This is the world that John Harrison entered. Not with a wounded dog or a complex astronomical theory, but with a simple, radical idea: he would build the impossible clock. John Harrison was not an astronomer. He was not a member of the Royal Society. He was a carpenter from a small village in Lincolnshire. Born in 1693, he was a man of humble beginnings who taught himself the trade of woodworking from his father. But he had a mind that saw the world differently. He wasn't just a carpenter, he was a master of materials, a quiet genius obsessed with the problem of friction and the nature of motion. With no formal training, he started building clocks. And these weren't ordinary clocks. They were made almost entirely of wood. He used oak for the wheels and self-lubricating tropical hardwoods for the moving parts that would normally require oil. He understood that oil was an enemy of precision. It changes with temperature. So he designed a clock that needed no oil at all. It was an idea that no other clockmaker in the world was pursuing. His early clocks were masterpieces of precision. He invented something called the gridiron pendulum. He knew that metal pendulum rods expand in the heat and contract in the cold, making a clock run slow or fast. So he combined interwoven strips of two different metals, brass and steel, which expand at different rates. As one expanded, the other counteracted it, keeping the pendulum's length, and therefore its swing, perfectly constant regardless of the temperature. He also invented a new kind of escapement, the part of the clock that gives it the tick-tock and controls the release of power. He called it the grasshopper because its two interlocking levers kicked back and forth like the hind legs of an insect. It was a thing of beauty, a mechanism that was virtually friction-free. Using a neighbor's chimney stack as a fixed point in the night sky, Harrison and his brother James tested their clocks against the stars. The best watches in London at the time were losing about a minute a day. Harrison's wooden grandfather clocks were accurate to within a single second a month. He had built the most precise timekeepers the world had ever seen. And all of this was just a prelude. The great challenge, the one that burned in his mind, was longitude. In 1730, Harrison, then 37 years old, traveled 200 miles to London with drawings for a new kind of clock, a sea clock. He went to see Drive. Edmund Halley, the astronomer royal. Ollie was impressed, but he knew the board of longitude, filled with astronomers, would be skeptical of a mechanical solution from a country carpenter. He sent Harrison to see the most respected clockmaker in London, George Graham. Harrison was terrified that Graham would steal his ideas. But after a 10-hour conversation that lasted late into the evening, Graham was astonished. He saw the genius in Harrison's designs, and, instead of stealing them, he gave Harrison a generous, interest-free loan to build his machine. For the next 5 years, John Harrison worked. The result was Harrison's number 1, or H1. It was not a clock you'd recognize. Weighing 75 pounds and made of shining brass, it looked, as Dava Sobel writes, like a model ship, escaped from its bottle. It had no pendulum. Instead, it used two massive, dumbbell-shaped balances, linked by springs, that swung in opposite directions. The motion of one perfectly canceled out the motion of the other. No matter how a ship pitched or rolled, the heart of the clock remained in a state of serene equilibrium. It was a machine designed to conquer chaos. In 1736, H1 was sent on a trial voyage to Lisbon. It performed magnificently. On the way home, The ship's captain calculated their position by traditional methods and believed they were near a point on the English coast called the Start. Harrison, consulting H1, calmly corrected him. The land they were seeing, he said, was the Lizard, more than 60 miles to the west. Harrison was right. The clock had saved them from a potentially disastrous navigational error. The board of longitude was stunned. They convened for the very first time in their 23-year history, specifically to see Harrison and his machine. Here was his moment. He could have demanded the full trial to the West Indies and claimed the £20,000 prize. But John Harrison was a perfectionist. Standing before the most powerful scientific body in the nation, he was his own harshest critic. He told them H1 had flaws. He said he could do better. He could make it smaller, more robust, more accurate still. He asked not for the prize, but for a little more time, and a little more money, to build a second, even better clock. The board agreed. They gave him £500 and their blessing. And so, Harrison went back to his workshop. He spent the next 2 years building H2, an improved, more compact version. But by the time he finished it, he was already disgusted with it. He had discovered a fundamental design flaw in its bar balances that he believed could not be overcome. He went back to the board in 1741 and, once again, asked for more time and money to build a third machine. This decision would consume the next 19 years of his life. For nearly 2 decades, Harrison labored over H3, a fantastically complex machine with 753 parts. During this long period, the world of astronomy was not standing still. The lunar distance method was gaining ground. A new instrument, the reflecting quadrant, or sextant, had been invented, allowing for much more accurate measurements at sea. A German astronomer named Tobias Mayer, using the groundbreaking mathematical work of Leonhard Euler, produced a set of lunar tables that were remarkably precise. The astronomers on the board of longitude were thrilled. This was the solution they had always believed in. It was scientific, intellectual, and rooted in the grand clockwork of the heavens. Compared to this noble, celestial method, Harrison's ticking contraption in a box seemed like a crude gimmick. The new Astronomer Royal, James Bradley, who had once supported Harrison, was now openly hostile. He saw Harrison and his plaguey watch as an obstacle to him and Mayer claiming a share of the prize money. Harrison, now in his 60s, was working in near isolation. But during his long struggle with H3, something unexpected happened. In 1753, he had a watchmaker named John Jeffreys build him a personal pocket watch, based on his own designs. It was a beautiful thing, but more importantly, it was incredibly accurate. Harrison had managed to miniaturize his temperature compensation ideas into a tiny bimetallic strip. The watch also had a mechanism that kept it running even while being wound. Harrison carried this watch with him everywhere. He studied it, marveled at its performance. And a radical new idea began to form in his mind. He had spent his life building bigger and more complex machines to achieve stability. But what if the answer was to go smaller? What if the solution wasn't a massive sea clock, but a large, supremely engineered watch? In 1759, after 19 years of work on H3, Harrison unveiled his fourth timekeeper. H4 was a complete shock. It looked nothing like its predecessors. It was a beautiful silver-cased watch, just 5 inches in diameter, weighing only 3 pounds. On its elegant white face, 3 blued steel hands pointed to the time. But its true beauty was on the inside. Harrison had replaced his complex anti-friction wheels and grasshoppers with something far more radical and expensive: jewels. The moving parts rested on tiny, exquisitely cut diamonds and rubies, almost eliminating friction and the need for oil. This was his masterpiece. "I think I may make bold to say," he wrote, that there is neither any other mechanical or mathematical thing in the world that is more beautiful or curious in texture than this my watch. Now, finally, he was ready. In 1761, Harrison's son, William, was sent on the official trial voyage to Jamaica with H4. The watch was placed in a box with 4 separate locks. William had one key, the ship's captain and 2 other officials had the others. Every day, they would gather to witness William wind the watch. The voyage was a stunning success. On the trip out, H4 performed so well that the ship's captain, initially a skeptic, offered to buy the first one Harrison ever put up for sale. After 81 days at sea, when they arrived in Jamaica, they checked the watch against the local time determined by astronomical observations. The total accumulated error was just 5 seconds. 5 seconds. That translated to a longitude error of just over 1 mile. It was an accuracy that was almost unbelievable. The prize should have been his. The watch had performed 10 times better than the Longitude Act required. But when William returned to London, the Board of Longitude began to hedge. This is where the story turns from a contest of ingenuity into a battle of wills, and where we meet Harrison's great nemesis, the Reverend Neville Maskelyne. Maskelyne was everything Harrison was not. He was 40 years younger, a Cambridge-educated astronomer, and a devout believer in the lunar distance method. In 1761, at the same time William Harrison was sailing to Jamaica with H4, Maskelyne was on his own voyage to the island of St. Helena, where he was successfully testing Meyer's lunar tables. He was meticulous, ambitious, and utterly convinced that the astronomical solution was the only one worthy of a scientist. Upon his return, he published the British Mariner's Guide, a book that made the complex lunar calculations more accessible to sailors. Then, in 1765, after the death of James Bradley and his short-lived successor, Neville Maskelyne was appointed the 5th Astronomer Royal. This gave him an ex officio seat on the Board of Longitude. The fox was now guarding the henhouse. The board, led by Maskelyne, refused to accept the results of the first trial. They claimed the calculations might be off. They called Harrison's success a fluke. They demanded a second, stricter trial to Barbados. In 1764, William Harrison once again set sail with H4. When he arrived in Barbados, he found that the man appointed by the board to be the sole judge of the watch's performance was none other than Neville Maskelyne, who had sailed there himself to prove the superiority of his lunar method. It was an outrageous conflict of interest. Maskelyne, flustered by the accusations from William and the ship's captain, even botched his own astronomical observations. Despite this, H4 once again performed with breathtaking accuracy. Over the entire 156-day trial, its total error was a mere 39 seconds, corresponding to a longitude error of less than 10 miles. It had succeeded, beyond any possible doubt. The board could no longer deny the watch's performance. But they still wouldn't give Harrison the prize. Instead, they offered him a deal. They would give him half the money, £10,000, but only if he revealed every single secret of H4's construction. And to get the second half, he would have to oversee the construction of 2 more identical copies, just to prove it wasn't a fluke. Harrison was old, tired, and felt betrayed. He raged, he argued, but in the end, he had no choice. In August 1765, a committee of experts, including Maskelyne, came to Harrison's house. For 6 days, the old man, under oath, dismantled his masterpiece by piece, explaining the function of every spring, every wheel, every diamond pallet. Then came the final, cruelest blow. The board demanded he surrender the watch itself. They locked it away in a storeroom at the Admiralty. He would have to build the 2 required copies from memory, without his own perfect pattern to guide him. While Harrison was struggling, Maskelyne was busy. He convinced the board to fund the annual publication of the Nautical Almanac, a book of pre-calculated lunar distance tables based on the Greenwich meridian. With this book, Maskelyne made Greenwich the 0-degree reference point for sailors all over the world. He was institutionalizing his own method. Then, he arranged to have H4 transferred from the Admiralty to the Royal Observatory for a 10-month trial under his personal supervision. Harrison had to watch as his precious timekeeper was delivered into the hands of his greatest enemy. Maskelyne subjected the watch to a bizarre series of tests, bolting it to a window seat and declaring that it failed to keep time accurately enough. He concluded that H4 was a useful accessory for navigation, perhaps to be used when cloudy weather made lunar observations impossible, but that it could never be the primary solution. The message was clear. The timekeeper was a mechanic's toy. The sky belonged to the astronomers. Years passed. Harrison, now in his late 70s, managed to complete one of the required copies, H5. But he knew he didn't have the strength or the years left to build another and endure the board's endless trials. Broken and desperate, he took a final, audacious gamble. He decided to go over the board's head and appeal directly to the king. His son William wrote a letter to King George III, a monarch with a keen interest in science, detailing the long and painful history of their struggle. The king was moved. He summoned William to Windsor Castle, and, after hearing the story, was reported to have muttered, "These people have been cruelly treated." Aloud, he made a promise, "By God, Harrison, I will see you righted." The king took H5 under his personal protection. He ordered a 10-week trial at his own private observatory at Richmond, away from Maskelyne's influence. The watch was locked in a box, and the king himself held one of the 3 keys, meeting with William and the observatory director each day at noon for the winding. H5 performed flawlessly, accurate to within 1/3 of a second per day. Armed with this undeniable proof, the king went to Parliament on Harrison's behalf. In 1773, Parliament awarded Harrison a bounty of £8,750, not officially the Longitude Prize, but an amount that, combined with his previous payments, nearly equaled it. It was a victory, but a bittersweet one. He had won the battle not through the official channels of science, but through the intervention of a sympathetic king. The final vindication came 3 years later. The great explorer Captain James Cook returned from his second voyage, a 3-year circumnavigation of the globe. On board, he had not carried Harrison's H4, which the board had stubbornly grounded, but a meticulous copy made by the watchmaker Larkham Kendall, known as K1. Cook's log is filled with praise for the timekeeper. He called it our trusty friend the watch, and our never-failing guide. With its help, he had charted the South Pacific with unprecedented accuracy. He wrote, "Mr. Kendall's watch exceeded the expectations of its most zealous advocate. It would not be doing justice to Mr. Harrison and Mr. Kendall if I did not own that we have received very great assistance from this useful and valuable timepiece." The debate was over. The chronometer had proven itself at sea, in the hands of the world's greatest navigator. John Harrison died in 1776, on his 83rd birthday. He lived just long enough to see his life's work vindicated. He had solved the greatest scientific problem of his time. And in doing so, he had unleashed a revolution. Watchmakers like John Arnold and Thomas Earnshaw simplified Harrison's complex designs, finding ways to mass-produce chronometers. The price dropped from nearly £500 for K1 to as little as £65. Naval officers began buying them with their own money. By 1815, there were some 5,000 marine chronometers at sea. Britannia, it was said, ruled the waves by dint of the chronometer. Harrison's simple box had given England mastery over the oceans, and laid the foundation for the British Empire. Today, if you visit the old Royal Observatory at Greenwich, you can stand on the prime meridian of the world, the line that Maskelyne's nautical almanac established. And inside, in a quiet gallery, you can see Harrison's clocks. The big, beautiful brass machines, H1, H2, and H3, are still ticking, lovingly restored by a naval officer named Rupert T. Gould in the 20th century after decades of shocking neglect. And next to them, silent and still, rests H4. The little watch that changed the world. A testament to a man who, in the words of Dava Sobel, wrested the world's whereabouts from the stars, and locked the secret in a pocket watch. Commentary. What an incredible story. When you first hear about the longitude problem, it sounds like a dry, technical puzzle for mapmakers and sailors. But Dava Sobel shows us that it's one of the great adventure stories of human history. It's a story about science, yes, but it's also about pride, envy, politics, and the astonishing power of a single, focused mind. For me, the most powerful lesson in longitude is about the nature of genius and the courage it takes to challenge the establishment. John Harrison was a true outsider. He didn't have the education, the social standing, or the credentials of the men on the board of longitude. They were the experts, the astronomers who believed the answer had to be as grand and complex as the heavens themselves. Their solution, the lunar distance method, was intellectually brilliant. It required deep knowledge, complex mathematics, and meticulous observation. It was, in their eyes, the only respectable path. And then along comes Harrison, a carpenter, who essentially says, "You're all looking in the wrong place. The problem isn't out there in the stars. The problem is right here. It's a problem of engineering, of friction, and temperature, and stability. And I can solve it by building a better machine." This is a dynamic we see again and again throughout history. The experts, invested in their own complex systems, often become blind to simpler, more practical solutions. They mistake complexity for sophistication. Harrison's genius wasn't just in his hands, it was in his way of thinking. He wasn't trying to measure the universe, he was trying to create a tiny, perfect universe of his own, one that could withstand the chaos of the outside world. His clock wasn't a tool for observing the celestial clock, it was the clock. His journey is also a profound testament to the power of persistence. Think about it. 19 years on a single clock, H3. Decades of battling skepticism and outright hostility from the most respected scientists of his day. They made him dismantle his masterpiece, they confiscated his work, they subjected him to unfair trials. It would have been so easy to give up, to become bitter and broken. But Harrison never wavered in his belief that he was right. He had a quiet, stubborn confidence that came not from arrogance, but from a deep, intimate knowledge of his work. He knew his clocks were true, and that was all that mattered. So what can we take from this story today, in a world where GPS can pinpoint our location in an instant? First, I think it's a reminder to question our assumptions about where solutions come from. When we face a difficult problem, do we automatically look for a complex, high-minded answer, or do we, like Harrison, look for the simple, practical mechanism at its heart? Sometimes the most revolutionary ideas are the ones that seem almost too simple, too mechanical, too unintellectual. Second, it's a lesson in the importance of craftsmanship. Harrison won because he was a master of his materials. He understood wood, and brass, and steel in a way that the astronomers could never understand the moon. He built his knowledge from the ground up, through trial and error, through patient, dedicated work. In an age of quick fixes and digital shortcuts, there is still immense power in that kind of deep, hands-on mastery. So, here are a few simple things to think about, inspired by the life of John Harrison. 1. Find your own longitude problem. What is the one big, meaningful challenge in your life, your work, or your community that everyone else thinks is impossible to solve, or is trying to solve in an overly complicated way. 2. Become a craftsman. Whatever it is you do, go deep. Learn the materials of your trade, whether they're lines of code, words on a page, or relationships with people. Master the fundamentals with the same patience Harrison used to build his wooden clocks. True confidence comes from that deep level of competence. And 3. Don't be afraid to be the lone genius. If you truly believe in your solution, even when the experts dismiss it, keep going. Trust in the results of your work. Like Harrison, you may have to fight for recognition, and you may need to find your own King George, a sponsor or mentor who sees the value in what you're doing. But the world is changed by people who have the courage to build a better clock when everyone else is still just staring at the moon. That was a summary of Longitude by Dava Sobel. We've journeyed through the core of this incredible story today, but I have to be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. It can show you the landmarks and give you the lay of the land, but it can never replace the feeling of actually walking the paths, breathing the air, and experiencing the journey for yourself. The real magic of this book is in Dava Sobel's masterful storytelling, the way she makes you feel the rocking of the ship and the ticking of the clock. If anything we've talked about has sparked your curiosity, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning history. It's about experiencing one of the greatest tales of human ingenuity ever told. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, and you want to keep exploring the ideas within the world's most influential books, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It helps us grow and ensures you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and keep growing together.